right. Hello and welcome to episode 70 of the Rhody podcast. Today I'm joined by a man who wore many different hats. He was a former captain of the University of Rhode Island Rams men's basketball team, former URI color analyst for Cox Communications, and served in many roles on campus as faculty member, Abu Bakr. I appreciate you taking the time to join me again. How are you today?
Doing great, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Again, I'm excited to learn a little bit more about uh, your journey as a player, faculty member, it's some of the roles that you've had on campus, and then also as a broadcaster at URI. So I'm excited to get into it and just learn a little bit more about you.
Oh, sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, of course. With all the guests that I've had on the show, I love learning a little bit more about, their backgrounds and the upbringings. So a question that I always love to start with is just what is your motivation or your why?
My motivation or my why? Well, I guess that depends on what decade we're talking about. right now, with me being in retirement mode, doing a little volunteer stuff with uh, Rhody Vault Report. I'm just enjoying life retired. My wife and I have numerous over a dozen grandchildren, so we spend a lot of time doing things with them. So just enjoying life as a retired person. So my motivation, my why, if you will, is to be healthy, stay healthy, and to grow better in retirement.
There you go. I appreciate that answer. Yeah, that's awesome. Of course, you've achieved so much both on the court and off the court and everything that you've done. But I want to start from the beginning and kind of work my way through where you are now. So,
Sure.
how did your passion for the game of basketball evolve?
Well, originally, when I was a kid growing up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York, which is really quite famous for the number of athletes that have come through our community. I was first originally interested in playing baseball. That was really my passion. But I was a tall, skinny kid growing up, and the primary sport come out of Brownsville, of course, was basketball. So my peers were like, hey, how come you don't play basketball? Why don't you play basketball? Why don't you play basketball? And then finally, they said, oh, there's a summer league, you can come play. So I finally decided to go ahead and give that a shot. And at that point in time, baseball became much less important to me, except, of course, rooting for the New York Yankees.
Nice.
So baseball became less important for me, and basketball became a big part of my life from junior high school to high school, and of course into college, and playing some time professionally in Europe.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm from Long Island. Originally, I'm actually here right now for the holidays. Senior at URI, but uh, yeah, no,
I played against a few guys from Long Island.
oh, okay.
Julius Irving,
There you go.
Al
There you go.
Skinner, Bill Chamberlain, who actually attended University of North Carolina the same year that I attended Duke University. So I got some old compatriots from Long Island that played years ago who did pretty well in their days playing.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are some big names right there. I'm awesome. That's awesome. I can't wait to hear a little bit more about some of those stories. But did you have, I guess, a mentor or a role model from a young age when you were playing basketball that I guess pushed you to succeed academically and also athletically?
Well, as far as the academic side was concerned, my parents, pretty much drilled academics, into me when I was a kid. It was always academics first, and recreation and playing and so forth. That came second. So whenever the academics was taken care of, then life was, wide open for us to do any number of things. And so I think that's where the initial discipline came from. Quite honestly, in my first couple of years in school, being independent, I kind of lost that focus a little bit, and actually then regained it when I transferred to URI back in 1970. It was my focus to become a much better student, and I did. In fact, when I was playing for URI, I was on the conference all academic team 2 years in a row. So I'm pretty proud of that, considering I had a couple of years there where I wasn't quite focused on my academics. So that turned around when I actually came to URI.
Yeah, I like to always ask athletes about, how they manage both academics and also athletics in general. Mental health and, physical health, obviously, that's something that athletes deal with. So, especially student athletes, that's something that I'm always curious about, if they had any mentors or someone that, helped push them kind of succeed and achieve that next level. So
Well,
that's definitely interesting.
right. Well, there are three people in particular that I can point out who were at URI. Now, as I mentioned, my parents, they're the first. When I came to URI, I was, I said, a little wayward, a little lost at that time, and I was really looking forward, hopefully, to becoming a student in the talent development program. Of course, being a student at URI, you're aware of the talent development program,
Mhm.
and of course, it was in its nascent stages back then. It came together in 1968. I transferred to URI in 1970. I'd heard about the program, and I had a meeting with Arthur Harge and Leo DeMeo, and I basically said, "Look, I really need to be involved in the program because I know that you have support." They gave me some disappointing news and some great news at the same time. They told me that because I was an out-of-state student and transfer, that I could not be involved, officially in the talent development program. But they said our door is open. You can always come in and talk with us if you need some support. So I know that talent development prides itself on getting involved with students who are not involved with the program, being adoptees, so to speak. But I may have been the first in talent development's history, and I can tell you right now that the support that they gave me was instrumental in me being a great student when I was at URI. I also had an advisor, Tony Bryan, who steered me in the right direction in terms of setting up my whole academic program while I was at URI. And in fact, with talent development, they went even further because I wound up becoming a staff member and also was a summer director for their pre-matriculation program one summer. So I owe it to those folks literally when I was at URI for kind of saving me and getting me on the right direction, mentoring me, supporting me, and advocating for my success. So those are some folks who are very important in my development.
Yeah, that's a great story. Obviously, that is important, not just in terms of being an athlete or in terms of being a student, but just in life, finding a career, finding a path post graduation. It seems like that definitely panned out for you, having the right resources around you as well in your time at URI. But I want to stick with just being in New York for a minute and then work our way to going to Duke and then eventually on to URI. I guess kind of a question that I just thought of, were you growing up in New York, did you have the opportunity to go and play in any of those parks in the city?
Well, I'm from Brooklyn. We had plenty of parks in Brownsville, as well as we played in recreation centers when we had a chance to play indoors. So there was a junior high school very close to me, David Marcus. There's the Brownsville Recreation Center. We didn't have AAU in those days, but we did have a team that was associated with my community, with Brownsville, and we used to go and play against other teams in other leagues. So that was very important for me, for me growing up. So another part of your question, give it to me again, please.
Just being able to play in different parks and kind of connect with different New York ballers, during that time.
Well, I mean, that's all it was. In Brownsville, of course, we had, I don't know if you ever remember the name Fly Williams, but Fly Williams came a couple of years after me. He played at Madison High School. He went to Austin P. Well, just to give you an example, he was a leading scorer in the nation. Um, there were a number of players that I ran into. In fact, when I was playing at Duke, one in particular, who played at Boys High, he wound up becoming the ACC Player of the Year. And like I said, New York and Brownsville was just a hotbed, for basketball. You could run into any number of guys who were playing and wound up playing professionally. So it was a very, very high level of competition in high school because when I went to Tilden High School, and we played in what was called the Suicide Division. We moved out of that division after a year, but that was the best high school teams in the city. I think the Bronx, prided themselves in having an equally great high school division, but the Suicide Division was great. Boys High School, Jefferson, Rasmus Hall. There were some really, really outstanding high school teams in Brooklyn when I was playing.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting to learn about. Sort of, you talk about how AAU obviously wasn't around back then, but sort of how, basketball players were able to go up against each other, coming up from a young age. Obviously, high school was definitely more prominent at the time. Some of the matchups that you had in those days playing against other schools that competed within the state or within the city. But, that's definitely interesting to learn about. Obviously, the thing I like about basketball and talking to a lot of other basketball players is just how it connects people all around the world and all around, the city or where they grew up. So I think that's definitely interesting. Moving on, following your high school days, you were committed to play for Duke University. Can you just talk a little bit about,
Yes.
what that recruitment process was like for you?
Well, it's not quite like it is today, where I think that student athletes, they're restricted, pretty much. Although I think they wind up having contacts with a lot of coaches because of social media and so forth. Um, I got recruited by a lot of schools, put it that way, and I made a number of visits. Um, Michigan comes to mind. I never actually had an opportunity to travel to California, UCLA. But I was recruited, by those schools. And actually, the first university that I visited actually was Duke University. And I was impressed by the coaching staff. Vic Bubis, in particular, who was the head coach and had taken Duke to his first Final Four, I think back in 63 or 64, maybe. So I was impressed, but I did do a lot of visits. St. John's University was very high on my list, and the decision to leave New York City took me to Duke University as opposed to maybe St. John's University.
Was there something about Duke that stood out to you when you took your visit?
I think it's the same as it is. Well, first of all, my family is from North Carolina, both my mother and my father.
Okay.
So there certainly was some affinity there for me, and I had family in North Carolina who came to rescue me on a couple of occasions, me being a young college student. So it was that affinity. It was the coaches who reached out, and like I said, Vic Bubis in particular, who I just thought was an outstanding man and individual. He actually was the only head coach, who visited me in my home. And that was significant in that, mine was a family. We didn't have a lot of money. We grew up in the housing projects in Brooklyn, in an area that, white head coaches might have had some trepidation to visit. He didn't hesitate at all, didn't think about it at all. Certainly wanted me to be there at Duke University as their first scholarship basketball player. So it was the relationship there, which I appreciated in the years following, my playing days. So Vic Bubis was the guy who attracted me, a great deal to come to Duke University. Respected him a great deal.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Obviously, we know the history behind Duke and everything that program has had. So, for a team like that and a couple of the other teams or programs that you mentioned that were reaching out, it must have been a little overwhelming at the time. All these schools kind of contacting you and you having to make such a big decision at such a young age. Can't imagine, what was going through your mind. But to ultimately commit to Duke must have been an honor, for you to leave Brooklyn and go down to North Carolina.
It was a decision that my teammates looked at me and said, "You're going where?" But it was a decision I felt good about. Circumstances changed and I didn't feel as good about being there, which is one of the reasons why I made the decision to transfer to URI.
So what went into that decision to become a Ram and transfer to URI?
Well, there was a change in leadership, in coaching staff. Uh, because at that time, freshmen could not play varsity, so I played freshman. After my freshman season, Vic Bubas elected to retire, became, I think, a special assistant to the president. And my sophomore year was a disappointment in some ways. First of all, I'll say to myself, first of all, in terms of how I felt that how I transitioned, to the ACC at that time, and also I just did not feel like there was a great affinity with the head coach who was there at that time. And I'll kind of leave it at that. But I didn't really feel that I didn't have the mentoring, if you will, on the court or off the court, the way that I had in the relationship that I had with coaching staffs and also staff at URI. I didn't have that when I was at Duke University. And as an individual, as a young man who went to college when he was 17 years of age, so I was going through that recruitment process when I was 16 and 17,
Right.
arrived at Duke University when I was still 17 years old. I was young and I needed the mentoring. And unfortunately, I don't think that necessarily a lot of schools in the South anticipated that that might be something that a young Black man from the inner city or an urban area would need coming to schools that were, fairly recently integrated. So that was a significant development for me. Didn't work out as well, but I certainly was surrounded by some pretty good coaches. Hubie Brown was my freshman coach. Chuck Daly was an assistant on the staff under Vic Bubas. So there were certainly some good coaches around. It didn't work out for me, unfortunately, once Bubas decided to retire.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, going to the University of Rhode Island, it worked out for you. I like to say everything happens, for a reason, and certainly did, because your career at URI really shifted you, I think, both as an individual, as an athlete, as a student. You played 2 seasons at Rhode Island when they were a member of the Yankee Conference. I believe your first season, 72, they actually won the conference. And you were a team captain when you were with Rhode Island. Do you have a favorite, part about just playing for the University of Rhode Island, being a Ram?
Yeah, we had when I played at Duke University, of course, we were embroiled in a rivalry that's one of the best in the nation. That's Duke University in North Carolina. The two schools were literally like 7 miles apart. So that was an interesting rivalry, one in which I played in, and I think I played pretty well. And then coming to Rhode Island, then all of a sudden I hear about this rivalry between the University of Rhode Island and Providence College. And I was like, oh, really? I had heard about Providence College. I remember there was this team that used to wear short sleeve shirts, for their jerseys. I remember Jimmy, what's his name? Jimmy. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on his name right now. John Thompson. I certainly remember Lenny Wilkins, who was a product out of Boys High School in Brooklyn. So I knew about Providence College. I didn't know much about Rhode Island at all. I'd heard Providence, but I didn't hear about Rhode Island.
Right.
So there was this rivalry. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. As a matter of fact, this is a bit of trivia. I played on the Rhode Island team that was the last team to beat Providence College at URI until URI began playing in the Ryan Center and played a game against renewed the rivalry playing on campus against Providence College. So we were the last team to actually beat PC on campus.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure if it was a 71, 72 season. It may have been when we won the Yankee Conference Championship. And they had some pretty good players, Marvin Barnes and Ernie DiGregorio and the like. So it was an intense rivalry. So that's something that was very meaningful to play in that kind of rivalry and to see that kind of enthusiasm on campus and in Keeney Gymnasium. And Keeney was smaller, but I'm telling you, it was always packed.
Yeah.
It was a raucous environment and a really great one to play in.
Mhm.
So I think that the PC rivalry wound up being something that was important. The interesting thing about us, playing PC in the rivalry, we would get together on our own and play pickup
Hmm.
with PC. They would usually come down to Kingston. Of course, no referees, no coaches,
Right.
and some of those games may have been, a little bit better than what fans actually got, coming to the games. But yeah, we had that kind of relationship with the PC players where we wanted to get together a few times during the year in addition to the games that we played officially, because there's always some bragging, rights and so forth that's going on. But we were very interested in the competition, and we respected each other.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, to hear the stories about that rivalry between URI and Providence is definitely something that I've looked into, the history between both programs. So to hear that piece of trivia that I actually did not know, the last or excuse me, the last team to beat Providence on campus until the Ryan Center um was built. That's definitely impressive. It sounds like that's definitely an accomplishment for you and your teammates. But real quick to stay on Rhode Island, what was it like in that first season to come in and win the Yankee Conference? Obviously, I'm not sure what teams were competing in that conference at the time, but what was that like to win the conference in your first year? Obviously, a transition from Duke to URI.
Yeah, all of the New England state universities.
Okay.
We'll start there. And Boston College, UConn, of course, was a part of that. UMass was a member of the conference. So I'll quote something that Al Skinner said to me, at least on a couple of occasions, of course, playing up at UMass. He said that his coach, Jack Lehman, was so concerned about playing us, excuse me, because he felt like Rhode Island had the best collection of talent of any team that he would play during the year. This is something that Al would say to me because I was there, of course, transferred in from Duke University. Tom Leone originally went to Tennessee. He transferred in to URI. Lloyd Adams transferred in from University of Wisconsin. Tom Barreo transferred in from University of Wisconsin. And all these guys transferred the same year that I transferred in from Duke University. And so we had to sit out a year, and then I sat out the year, and then the year we played, then we had a guy who I played against in high school by the name of Rob Young, who is a tremendous shooter. And I don't usually like to toot my own horn, but I think I'm fourth on the URI rebound average
Yep.
list. Well, Rob is like six. And Rob was about my height, really skinny. I was, we just didn't have different body types. But he was a heck of a rebounder, heck of a shooter and scorer. And so we played against each other in that suicide division in Brooklyn. He made his way from Idaho to Johnson Wales and then the URI. So it was nice connecting with him. But we really did have a very, very talented team that unfortunately in my senior year, a lot of factors went into us just falling apart as a team. So there's a great deal to say about chemistry, maybe being even more important than actual talent that you have on the team. Cohesion is going to win you games when you're kind of discombobulated, if you will.
Right.
You're not going to win. That's what
Yeah,
happened to us my senior year.
chemistry is so important in basketball and college basketball in general. Um, you talk about a lot of transfers coming in your first season, your junior season. You had a red shirt and then coming in and with all these other transfers and playing that first season at Rhode Island and winning the conference. How was the chemistry that first season with all these new players? Was it an easy transition to kind of flow on the court? I mean, it seemed like it from all the wins that you guys pulled together as a team, but how was it to kind of flow, with a bunch of new players that had never played before together?
Well, here's interesting. There were a bunch of us that were coming in who were new to the
Right.
place. And so there wasn't any necessarily an established um, relationship that folks had with URI. We were all new. As it turns out, of the of the players that transferred, only I and Tom Barreo saw significant minutes. Unfortunately, Tom Leone didn't get the time that I thought he could have and should have gotten, and Lloyd Adams wound up leaving the team. So I think that we all came together well. I think the players liked each other, had good times with each other. There wasn't really any dissension on our team at all. Guys didn't necessarily hang out with each other once practice or games were done, but when we were there, I think we had very good camaraderie.
That's
Guys
awesome.
coming from very different guys coming from very different backgrounds, but it worked.
Right. And when you have players that come from different backgrounds and they flow and they quick click together on the court, the chemistry is certainly there. Especially while they all enter together. I mean, I'm sure entering as a team, essentially, with all these other different players, you're able to form relationships and bond quickly. And of course, that, you know, translates to on the court. And obviously, it certainly did in that season. So that's definitely an interesting story. Similar to kind of, what Rhode Island is going through right now. I actually have a question about that later on. Obviously, the chemistry is something that they're still working on, but when new teams are formed, new head coaches come in, or new players are being recruited to come into a program, I always find that interesting of how they're going to develop and how they're going to end up clicking, and that chemistry will end up translating on the court. So that's definitely interesting how you guys were able to accomplish that in your first season.
Well, I guess a primary difference is after sitting out a year, we really had a team that had experience.
Right.
We weren't playing, freshmen or sophomores in that year. There was a senior, a couple of guys now who were juniors. All of us were juniors, really, except with the exception of one player. So we had guys who had some experience, under their belts. We weren't coming in, new to the college game. This URI team, of course, I mean, they've got one senior on this team,
Right.
one redshirt junior, and the rest of these kids are freshmen and sophomores.
Yeah.
It's going to take a little while.
Yep.
And while there's some talent, if you will, on this URI team, it still needs to develop. But for us, we had talent that was experienced and had been developed. We just needed to come together as a team, and that was accomplished well over the course of the season.
So wrapping up, a great career at URI, following college, you played a long career professionally overseas in Europe. Can you just talk a little bit about what that experience was like? I always like to hear about different players and their experiences overseas, obviously at such a young age, being able to travel the world and continue to pursue your passion.
Yeah, it was a great experience for me and my family, my wife and my son. We were able to integrate very, very well in the area where we were. We were in France. I went to the University of Po, and I actually studied French when I was there. My wife wound up getting a job as a teacher in the local schools to teach little ones English. And of course, my son is a 3-year-old at the time. He learned French and was probably learning it at a faster pace than my wife and I. So there was that experience,
Sure.
which was great. And we were in a rural area in France as opposed to being in Paris. And I know that some of the players who were in Paris, because we would go to visit them from time to time, they didn't probably have the same experience that we had because they were in Paris, and you can isolate yourself from French culture by being in Paris because there's so many English and American people there that you can kind of develop a little enclave and not actually integrate in French culture. we didn't have that luxury, where I was. We were the only English speaking or Americans in the entire area, entire region. So it was just a very different experience, but it was a great one that I'll cherish forever.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome experience. I'm sure you had the chance to go and visit other countries while you were there as well and stop in different places again at such a young age following college, to be able to play basketball and continue your playing career while also being in a different place, being around a different culture, meeting different people. I mean, that's definitely something that some people hope to do in their lives and don't get the chance to do. So that's definitely pretty cool to hear about.
Yeah, I wish I had done maybe a little bit more traveling.
Okay.
But once the season was over, I was back in the United States. And at that time, I was actually working with talent development in the summertime.
Right.
So I'd come back, get involved with talent development, and then head back to France or wherever we were playing. I know one year we met in Puerto Rico and had some games in Guadeloupe and Puerto Rico, and before the season began, playing against professional teams there. Uh, so yeah, it was a really really great experience. But by the time I elected to come back, it was time because back then it wasn't quite the way it is now. When I was playing in college, it was a daily routine. I'd get my ankles taped and that kind of stuff, preventative measures, and they didn't have any of that, there. So I sprained my ankles a couple of times, and once I did it once that last season, and it was clear that it was time to come home. And my son was at an age where we had to make some decisions about his education and schooling, so we elected to come back to the United States. And the easiest place for me to come back to was actually Rhode Island as opposed to New York. So I came back to Rhode Island and I immediately applied for graduate school, and then that kind of led me to working, pretty long career at URI.
Yes, that actually leads me into my next question perfectly. So after your playing career, you wound up back at URI, pursuing a master's. I believe I saw in sciences of human development, counseling, and family studies, and working towards an MBA. And then you ended up
Yeah.
working, like you said, having a long career for 17 years, at the Allen Shawn Feinstein College of Continuing Education. So was
Yes.
that a career path that you always saw yourself, taking or going down when you knew your playing career would be over?
No. Not at all. I certainly expected coming back from France, having the experience in talent development where we were counseling and mentoring students. I said, this is something that I think is going to be worthwhile for me. So as I mentioned, what's your meaning and purpose? It comes in stages, maybe in different decades. So then I
Right.
was I was committed to helping and working with students, and that's the reason why I pursued the master's in human development and counseling. So my first gigs, or if you will, both as a graduate student, was working with students and doing direct service and counseling. And then I certainly didn't expect it, but I was actually recruited to come to the Providence campus to be the coordinator of peer counseling services and ultimately the director of student services up there. Still in that helping role, but now beginning to migrate to becoming an administrator. So those years at CCE, was spent in direct service. Also spent, I was administrator in charge of the student services division up there, and then wound up being recruited to come back to the Kingston campus, where my primary role was not necessarily administration, running a department, but working in what we call PD lot, professional development, leadership, and organization training. And I kind of mentored myself, and I did have a good mentor also back then, working in that particular area, Dr. Gene Knott, and began to do consulting with different departments on campus to help them um, become much more efficient and effective in what they did, and helping them to identify what their purpose was as a department on campus, and then helping them to achieve that. So we did that for a number of years, and then began to do that on a campus-wide basis for President Robert Carruthers, and then wound up leaving that position and I was interim associate vice president for community equity and diversity for a short period of time before I decided to retire from URI.
Yeah, like I said, holding many hats, following your playing career and returning back to Rhode Island, several different areas as a faculty member. But just going back for a second to what you said about PD professional development, leadership, and organization training. Um, this led to your appointment as an executive assistant to the president, but something that you were
Yes.
talking about while working there and also in your master's, working towards development and counseling. What was that like, I guess, during this time period to advise and, I guess guide younger generations and the students at this time while serving in these multiple different roles?
Well, I had I had a universe of experience in terms of working with students and helping them to develop. When I was on campus, just as I got back from you from Europe, of course, there was experience working with the talent development students. Then I worked in health education department as well as the counseling center. So there was kind of a more direct counseling relationship that I had with students one on one. And then being recruited to work at CCE, the student population there was primarily adults returning to college. So
Okay.
there was a different set of experiences working with adults than there was working with students who were just out of high school. So we had a staff that was populated primarily by students. They were called peer counselors. But the advantage that I had, which was so wonderful, is that many of those folks, instead of like the basketball team when I was juniors, we were talented and experienced. I also had talent and experience on my student staff because many of these folks were already out in the world of work
Sure.
and they were coming back to school to get their degrees. So they had experience in ways that younger students didn't have, but they still needed to be mentored through their college experience.
Right.
And that was a great deal. That was a lot of fun. And then, of course, coming back on campus, and instead of necessarily working with individuals, my role was to work with organizations to help them to maximize what they could do within their departments, but to do it as a group, as a cohesive group. So I would have to say that a lot of what I learned as an athlete really helped me to transition to the experience that I had working as an organization development consultant on campus to help organizations develop cohesion, understand what their goals were, and understand what their individual talents were to be able to accomplish that. So it all kind of came together. And did I have any idea in my head that that's what I was going to wind up doing when I was in undergraduate school, even in grad school? No.
Hmm.
The opportunities came, the experiences came, I think, in large part because of preparation on my part and being willing and open to take on challenges that I never had before. I mean, I wasn't quite sure if I'd be able to head up to CCE and fulfill that role. I wasn't sure if I would be able to come back down on campus to fulfill that role. But I knew that I had the talent, and I knew that I had experience. I knew that I had talent. It was just a matter of how do I manifest it now in a different role. So my career at URI was great because I had multiple opportunities to do multiple different things,
Right.
utilizing skills, learning new skills and talents. Yeah, it was a good ride.
Yeah, and that's really inspiring too. More on the counseling and development side and mentoring side. Me personally, I'm graduating this upcoming spring, but a lot of when I came in as a freshman to where I am now with sports media or just in general, I owe a lot of that to my professors and some of my, I guess you can call them guidance counselors and other people that I've met with over the last 4 years. So, for you to come into that role and like I said, pay it forward to whether it's someone working towards their masters or an organization working towards accomplishing something, or just an undergrad working towards a degree, or an athlete, whoever you're working with, I'm sure it felt definitely rewarding to pay what you learned as an athlete at University of Rhode Island forward in a career and this being your job. following high school, college, and also your time overseas. So that I can imagine that definitely being rewarding, being able to pay it forward. I definitely could say that, like I said, a lot of people have helped me get to where I want to be, and they still are helping me as I'm approaching my graduation, my commencement. So it's
And so
definitely
for
cool to hear
you,
about.
what's your career path?
Still trying to figure that out. I definitely want to work in the sports industry. I like obviously podcasting. I've done a little bit of broadcasting. I have a few questions about your broadcasting career a little bit as well, coming
Sure.
up. But with WRIU, the student-run radio station, I've done a little bit of everything right now on campus. Really trying to work my way around the Harrington School and connect and network with different people. And I feel like this platform, this podcast, has actually helped me do that a lot because I've met so many different people with so many different stories. Um, excuse me. I like to say that this podcast has helped me with storytelling because I'm able to kind of more so with athletes kind of tell the stories about their upbringings and where they started behind the number and behind the jersey or underneath the jersey. I feel like,
Right.
and we can get into this a little bit when I talk about your broadcasting career and as a journalist, but I feel like broadcasters or journalists or whoever, they tend to overlook the stories of how an athlete got to where they are now, their success stories. They really only focus on or prioritize their stats or their performances on the court or on the field. So for me personally, that's a great question. I get that asked all the time, what I want to exactly do. But I definitely want to do something with storytelling and helping people tell their stories. And again, I think a podcast is a great platform to do that.
Well, some of the best sports broadcasts that I've seen have been, documentaries where you go beyond the numbers and say, here's the person. And it's good to have that kind of exposure to fans
Right.
because sometimes they only see that is number 32 out there, and oh, gee, he didn't make any shots today, but
Right. Right.
recognizing that, for example, URI, I mean, these are kids.
They're
I
freshmen
can
too.
say
A
that
lot of
now because I'm 71
underclassmen.
years old. These are kids.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so they're going to have to learn and experience. They're talented. Young
Sure.
men, but they are 18, 19, years of age. Fortunate some of them a little bit older. So yeah, so it's great. Think about your career path, but the greatest thing I can say is, man, be open to the opportunities and be willing to go beyond your comfort zone. Be willing to go beyond your comfort zone and look at it as the greatest opportunity and know that going beyond your comfort zone, it's not going to be great,
Right.
first time out. When I first did a broadcast with Don Coyne,
He's
I
actually a
think we
former
did it.
professor of mine. Sorry to cut you off. He's a former
Well,
professor of mine.
hey, listen,
Yeah.
I owe my broadcasting career to Don Coyne.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
He probably say something a little bit different. I owe my broadcasting career to Don Coyne. He was doing URI games with Mike Montecalvo, I think, who is a journalist on Channel 12, I think.
Okay.
Mike was doing play-by-play. Don was doing color analysis. Mike Montecalvo, I guess, got maybe some different assignments, at the TV station, and maybe six. So Don moved over to the play-by-play, and then he called and asked me, said, "Hey, do you want to come and do this?" Now, the reason why he called me was because I had talked to him and said, "Hey, I would love to come into studio and maybe do a mock game with you, just to practice, because I haven't done it before,
Sure.
just to see whether or not it's something I maybe have an affinity for." So before I had an opportunity to do that, Don's calling me and says, "Oh, by the way, this is like Thursday, so we got a game on Saturday." I'm like, "Sure, why not?"
That's the
I'm
best
not
way to
ready,
learn,
but
though.
I'm not ready,
Yeah.
but I'm going to do it. And
Right.
the funny thing is I had no idea how a game works.
Yep.
That a producer is going to be in your ear talking to you while you're trying to do a broadcast. And so the first time the guy comes in and starts talking to me, I I'm
Yep.
like, what the hell? What's going on? So I'm
Yep.
in mid sentence and I stop, and so Yeah, be open to the opportunities. It will only help you to reach another level. So yeah, so do your thing, Adam. Yeah.
I appreciate that advice. I have a few more questions for you. I'm going to
Sure.
get into a little bit more of broadcasting, but just to backtrack for a second, staying on some of your work on campus as a faculty
Yeah.
member, you worked in the Office of Community Equity and Diversity, as you alluded to, before your retirement. But what did you learn from that position that, really taught you about community equity and diversity? Obviously, that's so important in today's society.
Well, throughout my entire working career, I was always interested in improving the diversity at the University of Rhode Island. When I first became a student here, we always called ourselves the 1/10 of 1%. And I think that was the actual statistic of the number of students of color on campus. 1/10 of 1%. So the focus right then was how can we create a campus that's friendly for everyone? And if you have students coming on your campus and you're not sure exactly what their culture, what their experience is, you don't really know how to make changes in your environment to accommodate those folks.
Right.
So, so that was a part of my development, some of my interests throughout my entire career. So I had the opportunity to work on various committees, to do various initiatives that was promoting community equity and diversity on campus. Coming into that role, I had an opportunity to be able to formalize my understanding of campus equity and diversity by getting involved in a postgraduate program at Cornell University.
Oh,
So I had that experience throughout my entire career at URI doing various things, both on the Kingston campus as well as in Providence. And there's a lot, so I can't really enumerate all of them.
right.
But then I also had the opportunity to get a little bit more formal training to understand how a campus diversity program can come together. So that was my experience kind of before being in an official role. So I felt it was something that was natural for me, but I also had more of a philosophical foundation to say, okay, I believe that I can come in and help to actually develop a campus-wide program. So it was rewarding, but then at a certain point, I felt that it was time for me to go.
Okay.
The relationships and the affinity, they weren't there, and I really didn't feel that at that stage of my career that I wanted that to be more important or take precedent to the actual work that was being done. So I elected to retire. Plus, just a couple months before I did retire, my father had passed away earlier in the year, and I moved my mother, who was 93 at the time. I moved her to Rhode Island to come and stay with me and my wife, and yeah, so we brought her, and so so that became a different focus. Was a focus on my mother and family, as opposed to my career at URI, which I felt ended at the right time. I would have preferred that it had been a little bit longer, but I thought it was the right time for me to go.
Yeah, like I said, everything happens for a reason. Family comes first, of course. So,
Yeah,
long career and congratulations on that, obviously. Um, that's definitely something to be proud of, and I think you accomplished a lot in the different roles that you had at URI.
appreciate
y-
it.
yeah, of course. You talked a little bit about broadcasting. I have two or three more questions to wrap everything up.
Sure.
I just want to ask you a little bit about your broadcasting career. So, just what was it like, to have the opportunity to call several games, for the program that you once played for?
Well, I think I think it was natural. I mean, I had a good career. I understood the game. I saw the game, I thought, very well. One thing I thought that I was pretty good at and could have become a career also was I thought I was pretty good at seeing and evaluating talent. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of learning, because in many respects, and this is one position I had coming to work back on campus at PD Lot, was I was somewhat of an introverted person. And so the other side of my personality had to be developed a little bit more, because you're on TV and you're talking for 2 hours. You can't really be an intro you can't really be an introvert.
Right.
And my style was not to be you know, I don't know what you call it, the Dick Vitale model or mode of coaching, or the Bill Raftery. I was a little bit more subdued. I was analyzing the game, and I didn't go in so much for the you know theatrics of it all.
Sure.
Um, so, but it was hey, it was a lot of fun. I learned a great deal. By the time I got done with it, I felt that I was pretty solid professional in terms of how to do a broadcast with a broadcast partner. And like I said, Don Coyne was a good partner of mine. Um, and then I worked for a number of years with Eric Freed, a consummate professional as well. So I had the opportunity to work with some pretty good guys. I even had an opportunity to work with Don Orsillo. I did a few games. I did a few games for Nesson,
Okay.
and I think we may have done a Boston College game. I think it may have been Boston College and Northeastern, if I recall. Um, but I had just gotten off a, I think I had just gotten off a flight from California. I'm walking at the San Diego Zoo, Wild Animal Park, with my grandson. And so we're walking up the hill, and I get a call, my cell phone, and somebody had messaged me, said, "Oh, by the way, we got this game, and we want to know if you can do it." And I said, "Well, all right. Well, when is it?" So, "Oh, well, it's this Saturday." I said, "Well, I'm actually flying in Friday night, so I'll see you at the game on Saturday." So I think I flew in on Friday night and went up to the game on Saturday. And as I think it was this game. As I recall, it was this horrific traffic and an accident on 93 going up to Boston. So I got to the arena just as we were supposed to be doing the pregame,
Right.
taping the pregame. And I think I flubbed the first one because I was like all discombobulated. And they're like, "Well, Abu, we don't have any time to tape this. This is going to go live now." I think when we were going live, I think is when I did my best. So yeah, so Don Arcillo, man, the consummate professional. He was just about as calm and collected as he could be. So that was a great guy to be able to work with, in addition to my regular broadcast partners, Don Coyne and Eric Freed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you have any like games that really stuck out that you really remember? Anything at Rhode
Oh yeah,
Island that anything
oh
that you
yeah,
remember that stuck out?
oh yeah.
Favorite games to call?
First, well, first game at the Ryan Center.
Okay. That's a good one.
URI against USC, Southern California.
Right.
Great game. Down to the wire, to the buzzer. URI comes back. Dustin Alinga hits a shot. I think Dewan Robinson may have made a shot before that, and Dustin Alinga makes a shot on the baseline. URI bench erupts. They come out the court. They're hugging Dustin. It's like the game's not over. So then USC comes down. They get off a great shot. Ball goes in. Referees have to come to our side of the floor to look at the replay. So we had an opportunity to see who won that game before the referees called it, for URI. So that was super exciting. The first game at the Ryan Center could not have been a better experience for us calling that game.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to Dewan Robinson about that. I mean, I obviously didn't live to see it, but it's a classic. I've seen highlights of it on YouTube and everything like that. So I can imagine that being. I was just on the call for WRU for the UMass Lowell game before I went home for break, and even that
Okay,
game, I don't know if you had the chance to check it out. That was also a classic for this program.
I was there. I was in press row, and I can say
Okay.
one thing. that's going to be true about this team. They played great. The defense was outstanding, the best I've seen them play this year because of the intensity of the defense. Now they got down by 12, early in the second half, and that defense pulled them back, and then finally the ability to be able to make some shots on that team. That was a tough team. So
Yeah.
that was a good win to see.
Yeah,
And
definitely a
then
momentum
we had a
boost.
couple of games against Dayton that went down to the wire. So those are good games to call.
Yeah, it's always those last minute one, final minute, who's gonna win, last shot, games that I feel like I happen to always be on the call for. It feels like the longest games, but it's so fun. Like you're not even thinking about it. The clock doesn't even matter. You're so locked in. For me at least, I'm more of a play-by-play guy because I never really played, so I don't have any experience to attribute to the broadcast aside from just journalistically.
Right.
But I feel like just
I'll tell you one of the worst moments.
okay.
Um, first game of the season at the Ryan Center. EC Matthews goes down in a hump in the lane, and I'm at an angle. I'm looking at it from an angle, and I'm not even sure if I said it on the broadcast, but I was like, "This does not look good." You could see his knee kind of buckle. He goes down, and that was also one of the worst post game interviews that I've ever had to do.
Mm,
When I'm telling the producers, Dan, we do not want to talk to Dan Hurley now. The guy,
right. Yeah.
so I talked to him for a minute, and I let him go. I know you want to get in there and find out how your guy's doing.
Yeah.
And that was so pivotal, for that team at that time because they were projecting, and they lose EC Matthews, and they kind of plateaued and maybe went down a little bit. So it wasn't until that next year, I think, that they became a postseason team.
Yeah.
But then, by virtue of EC Matthews being out 1 year, now they had a collection of talent that was, just stupendous. So, but that was probably the low point, I think, in my broadcasting, was to watch him go down.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say the Jarvis Garrett with the broken jaw and he had to put on the mask. I thought you were gonna say that one.
No, well, I mean, Jarvis was tough, man. Jarvis was tough, and he played some of his best basketball with that doggone mask on.
That's true.
So
That's true.
yeah, so no, I'm not even sure I remember him getting hurt, but I certainly remember EC Matthews going down. That was tough to watch.
Yeah, like I said, I'm from New York. I'm from Long Island, but my dad went to URI in the late '80s, so I followed the program even throughout high school, and obviously I went to URI. I'm still there, but I was definitely watching during those Dan Hurley years. I used to go to Fordham and watch a lot of those games, and when the tournament was in
You would
Brooklyn,
go to Fordham, huh?
yeah, Rose Hill
That
Gym.
was one of the toughest places for this team to play.
Yeah, believe it or not, too. And their program has been struggling. I wouldn't say now they're actually doing a little bit better, but for years their program struggled, and for some reason they always had our number. I don't know why. Um, but yeah, no, I used to go to Brooklyn to the Barclays Center, and to
Yeah,
Fordham just to check them out. And obviously now I'm covering the team as a student, so I definitely understand what you're talking about with some of those Dan Hurley years and EC Matthews going down, but it all worked out for them in the end. So pretty cool story.
yeah. Let me tell you something about Dan Hurley, right? Um, I think this was at George Mason.
Okay.
I think, and it's either George Mason or I think we were at LaSalle maybe. So I would always get down there. We did some away games, and so I'm there and I'm watching the teams, practice, shoot around the day of the game, a day before the game, whatever it was. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching and I'm kind of collecting my thoughts and I'm, writing some stuff down. Dan Hurley had each of those guys, each of his players, walk over to me across the court and introduce themselves to me.
That's awesome.
Now, I thought that was awesome from this standpoint, I think he wanted his players to be respectful of what came before them, and that there was a guy who was in their shoes who was now doing their broadcasts. I never
Okay.
talked to him about why he did that at that particular point in time, but I really appreciated that and respected Dan, so much for that.
Right.
And that demeanor. But Dan, I mean, one day I'm at the Ryan Center. Don't ask me why, but I'm down there and I hook up with Dan and we walk for a long time just talking basketball. And so we get back to the Ryan Center. And I'm actually heading through the Ryan Center to get to my car. And he says, "Hey, you want to come in and just check out our film session?" I was like, "Man, I'd love to, but I got to get going." So that's the kind of guy that Dan was, and I remember. In addition to the fact that he was one heck of a coach who
Right.
had to go through his growing pains this first year because he was quite animated on the court.
Yeah.
Sometimes in a great way, sometimes not in not such a great way.
Yeah.
So
I'd
yeah,
have to look up the total of how many texts he got during his time at URI, but it's definitely up there in history with some of the other coaches, I'm sure.
yeah, and I guess he did what he had to do, and then he wound up having his team, make a pretty deep run in the NCAA tournament, and had that tremendous talent, and they were really fun to watch.
For sure. I have two more questions for you. So sticking on
Sure.
broadcasting, and then one more question, final question just about this team. So with Don Call, the late Don Call, did you have a relationship with him? And if you did, can you just talk a little bit about what kind of person he was?
Yeah. Actually, just a few weeks before Don passed away, I gave him a call just to say, "Hey, congratulations on the career, et cetera, et cetera." So we're talking, and I'm probably on the phone too long with him. I'm on the phone with him maybe an hour, and we're just talking basketball. Did you know this guy? Did you know that guy? Oh, did you play with him? That kind of stuff. So whenever for the most games, after the game, they were still on the radio. We had just done our post game stuff, and I'd walk around and I'd, tap them both, just to say hi. So we didn't have a lot of conversation. But I'll tell you one funny story. URI playing Providence College up at the Dunk. I'm at the game. I don't know where the hell I was sitting. But Don and Steve, they're broadcasting the game, and there's a chair next to Steve, and it's open. So I sit down next to Don as he's calling the game. And during the game, when Steve is broadcasting, I got Don Call saying, "Look, talk off camera, or off mic. Look at he's elbowing me. Oh, why did he do that? Look at that. Look at that." So here he was, doing the broadcast, but he's being a basketball guy talking to another basketball guy and just having the time, I wouldn't say the time of his life, but he's like, "Oh, why is he doing that? Why is he doing that?" So the guy knew the game. He's a Hall of Famer, and I'm just glad that he and I had a few times when we could get together and just and talk basketball. He was a great guy. His wife is a wonderful woman, and it's just it's too bad that he's gone.
Yeah.
Gonna really miss him.
Yeah, well, he's certainly missed by all of Rhode Island and the URI community, and his legacy will for sure live on forever. So, I've heard great stories. I wish I had the chance to meet him, but like I said, now his legacy will live on. So, definitely
Well, I'll
cool
tell
to hear
you,
that cool
it
story.
must be the basketball guys and wanting to elbow you because I sat at I think I sat at a women's game on the court, and I'm sitting next to Jim Barron.
Hmm.
I almost had to get up and leave because Jim is killing me because he's elbowing me too. Every time there's a play going, "Oh, look, look at that, look at that, oh, come on," he's banging me on the leg, he's elbowing me in the shoulder. Like, man, Jim, man, take it easy, man. But yeah, Jim is cool. He's from Brooklyn, and I've got a real good friend who was a assistant on his staff, Desmond Oliver, who's the head coach at East Tennessee State University. And Desmond got married up in Toronto, and Jim attended the wedding, and I attended as well. And they had a thing, and Jim and I had to, sing a song together at the wedding. So Brooklyn guys having fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. One more question for you. Last
Yes,
question,
sir.
just to check in on the program's current state.
Yeah.
Obviously you've been covering them with the Vault Report, and you sort of alluded to it before. With Archie Miller steering the ship in his, young career at the helm right now for the Rams. I'm just curious, what your takeaways so far, with non-conference play wrapping up, how this staff is really building for the future, and also just what you're looking forward to for conference play.
Yeah. First of all, I've said, people have this, Archie, we got Archie Miller. I said, okay, well, you got Archie Miller. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get, instant results because it's
Right.
Archie Miller. You got to have the right players. You got to get them involved in your system, and you have to give them time to develop, especially since he's got such a young team. So my thing is, you be patient. Your expectations are for them to improve. Okay, not to make postseason.
Right.
So the expectations are for them to improve. So this is the way I see it. You got this team, okay, and they beat Army. Good game. Improvement. They beat UMass Lowell. I thought that was one of the best games of the season.
Sure.
Then they go on the road. As far as I'm concerned, it's a stinker, and they lose. So you're going to have with this team. But what you hope you have, is this. There's going to be ups and downs, but you're hoping that you see this improvement over the course of the season. One, they're getting to know each other. They're playing well. They're getting in the middle of the system. But also the players are learning how to play at this level, and they are getting better.
Right.
So you just don't know how they're evaluating all of these guys. I say, hey, there may be one or two guys who are not with URI next year for one reason or another. They don't feel like getting enough time, or maybe the coaching staff doesn't feel like they're ready to play at this level. We've had a number of, kids from URI decide to transfer elsewhere, some up, some down. So I would say, look for this team to improve, to lose some games that you expect that they would win, and to win some games that you would expect that they would lose, because they're not going to be terribly consistent. At least I don't think they will over the course of this season, but you hope that they become more consistent. And then the time when they will develop will be over the summer, where they get to work individually, they get to build their bodies up a little bit. And it'd be interesting to see how Coach Miller decides to schedule in the non-conference. Does he keep the same type of teams that he played this year? I don't think there's going to be that much more of a change, because I think in these non-conference games next season, you want to see them, maybe get themselves over 500. And if they play some of those non-conference games after the season, they would win some of those games. There's no question about it.
Sure.
So it's going to be an interesting ride. I'll say one thing too about Archie Miller. I don't know Coach Miller or the coaching staff. First time I haven't had an opportunity to get to know the coaching staff in all the time that I've been here. The last press conference I attended was a full press. Archie ran down his team, not only the game, but also where they are. He did that in about 5 minutes, hit every single point. So here's a coach who knows his craft. He knows how to coach basketball. He understands how to develop a program. He understands how to develop a team. So this listening to him gave me a lot of confidence, because it wasn't some guy who was like, pulling stuff out of the air and trying to figure it out.
Right.
He's trying to figure it out, but he's doing it with a coaching philosophy and an understanding of how the game is played and how a team improves. So I'm very optimistic about this team. I don't have any expectations as far as this season, except that they will improve. But then I'm saying, okay, next season, you got some guys who are a little bit older now. You
Right.
expected them to have a little bit more success as far as wins and losses are concerned. So that's how I see it. And, Archie Miller didn't come here, just to be okay. He came here to win championships. So year 3, 4, I'm expecting that they might be approaching that level.
Yeah, and I think Coach Miller's resume certainly shows what he can do. I think to your point, and I 100% agree with everything you were saying, um, development and growth will come. I agree. I don't expect them to, be making a postseason push this season because a lot of this team, majority of this team, are newcomers or underclassmen, and they still need to grow and they still need to figure out, what kind of players they are. But I think if we can get our forwards developed, which they are heading down that path, um, specifically Sam, Chiku, Bilal, that will certainly help in terms of the front court. But in the back court, we have 3 guards right now that are all listed as sophomores. Leggett, being a sophomore, 3 years played, his first season was a COVID year. He's technically a sophomore. Brayon Freeman's a sophomore, and Sebastian Thomas. So I think in 2 to 3 years, and not to put a timeline or a timetable on when their success will come, but in 2 to 3 years, they'll be a guard heavy team, assuming more guards come into the program, and they'll be led by veterans. And I think that will definitely help again. And also they'll understand the system and the way that Coach Archie is running his team a little bit more, having been there already for 2 or 3 years, depending on when that success comes.
Right,
So I
right,
definitely agree with you in that. I think it will come. I agree. I don't expect a postseason push, and I think that there will be some wins that surprise us and turn some heads during conference play. There'll be some losses that are ugly in games that we should have won. I think the Boston College game, the Tulane game, um, you could argue the first couple minutes in the Providence game, they were playing very well. I think there were a lot of games, even Quinnipiac, I think you could argue that should have been wins. But if I think to your point again, if we play them later this year when the development and the growth and more things are hashed out rather than the first month or two of the season, the outcome might be different. So I'm definitely looking to
right.
see how the future goes.
Well, here's the thing to look at. I don't know whether or not the guards that you just talked about,
Right.
and then of course you got an Ant Harris,
Right.
coming to the program hopefully after exams. I don't know whether or not these guys are at the same talent level, excuse me, as Tyson Wheeler, Katino Mobley,
Hmm.
and Preston Murphy. Okay?
Sure.
There's one reason why they beat Kansas. Kansas could not guard them. URI spread the floor with Tyson and Katino and Preston. And that bigger Kansas, they couldn't guard them when they spread the floor like that. And they just let them go. They just let them do their thing. I think that was Harrick's year. And I remember having a brief conversation with Jim Harrick, and I had a brief conversation with Katino Mobley when Harrick came in to be URI's head coach. First of all, Harrick, I'm talking to him on the phone. I'm saying, oh, this and this. And he said, well, why don't you come on down here to the office and talk to me? I said, well, okay. So I'm in the office. I talked to him for about an hour, and I give out, well, here's what I think. So he's listening. He's listening pretty intently. And then I see Katino Mobley. He's sitting in another office. Not sure what he was doing. So I go in and talk. I started talking to him for a while. He said that this is about as excited as he's been since he's been at URI, because when he talked to Coach Harrick, he said, hey, I'm just going to let you play. Do your thing. And you could see the kind of year that Katino had. He's Atlantic 10 Player of the Year and
Right.
Propelled himself into a long-term contract as an NBA player.
Sure.
So we'll see whether or not those guys have that level of talent. Because I mean, when I saw Tyson Wheeler play in the tournament the day that URI signed him, and I was like, oh my God, this kid can really play. And I told him when he was a freshman, I said, I think you can be a pro. I mean, things have to work out. You're kind of a little guy. I said, but you have the ability, I think to be a pro by the time you get out of here. Right circumstances, things would have worked out, better for him as far as the NBA was concerned. But yeah, they had that three-headed guard thing going on for them that other teams couldn't handle.
Mm.
So we shall see whether or not when Ishmael Leggett is a senior and whether or not Brayon Freeman's a senior and whoever else is going to step up in the mix, whether or not they have that level of talent to be able to give them that level of success. That was an Elite Eight team that should have been a Final Four team, if not for, running into Stanford in the last minute of the game.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
I think they're capable, but we'll see how we'll see.
That's an interesting comparison to the 98 team with that three-headed monster. I was more so thinking along the lines of some of the guards that, Dan Hurley was running with, I mean, if you consider Terrell a guard, you talk about E.C. Matthews, Stanford Robinson. I mean, there were so many guards that Doughton off the bench as a freshman, even Fats Slater, I think as a freshman the second year, they just had so many guards. Jarvis Garrett, Stanford Robinson. There's just so many
Again,
guards.
you've got talent there that's pro level talent, NBA level talent. You got Terrell, who for a number of years who was a two-way player. You got Jeff
Right.
Doughton, who's a two-way player now. EC, if not for that knee injury, I remember URI playing PC at PC. EC was the best player on the floor for those two teams.
Yep.
So maybe maybe that, affected him a little bit, in terms of getting to that next level. But you got 6 or 7 of those guys in that team.
Yeah.
They played professionally. Andre
Crazy.
Berry, Stan Robinson, all those guys, they play professionally. They're playing in Europe. They're making money. They're having great careers, and it's
Sure.
lasting. Hassan Martin. I mean, these guys had great talent, and they put it to use. So we shall see whether or not an Abdul Sam or Bilal can do the kind of things that a Hassan Martin, could do, who by far was one of the best shot blockers, I think, natural shot blockers I've seen. I mean, left-handed, I'd say, this is a Bill Russell type shot blocker because of his unique timing and so forth. Or can we find another Kenny Green?
Right.
Who, when Dikembe Mutombo and what's his name? Well, was also at Georgetown. Alonzo Mourning. They were 1 and 3 in rebounding in the country. Well, guess who was number 2? Kenny Green. Okay, so we shall see.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
You still there?
I'm here. That's an easy edit. Don't worry about that. I can cut that out.
I'm trying to figure out where the hell I am. Okay, there we go.
No
Sorry
worries.
about that.
No worries.
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good point. Yeah, for sure. I think you bring up a good point. I think, Rhode Island, the future is there. It'll be interesting to see, how this staff continues to recruit and how they continue to build. I mean, all that we can say is we'll see. But do you have anything else? Anything else to leave out there for the fans who might be watching this at home?
Well, all I can say is folks have to be patient, watch them develop. If you have any children, they're not the same, when they're 2 as they are when they're 5. Okay. And then if you're lucky enough, they grow up to be adults and they have children too, and you see them as parents. Be patient. Let's see what happens in terms of Archie Miller identifying the talent necessary to be a champion. I don't know if these guys are it, but he came here to win championships, so he will do what's necessary to build this program and get the talent necessary to bring in or to develop to get them to the place where they need to be. We shall see. Those are my three last words. Is we shall see.
There it is right there. Abu, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I don't want to take any more of your time this evening. I hope you have, I hope I have the chance to meet you sometime soon. Maybe at a game or something, or at press conference. I won't be there for a while because I'm home for the winter break, but I'll be back around mid-January. But I'm looking forward to keeping in touch, hopefully in the meantime. And of course, go Rhody.
Absolutely. Go Rhody. Take care. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.